Hey friends, welcome to Haunted Bedtime. Before we get started, just a quick note. There are only a few ads during the first 15 minutes, and after that, it's completely ad-free. Just you and me. If you enjoy the calm vibes here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely feels right to you. And I'd really love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Share it in the comments. It's always amazing to see how this little community connects people all around the world. I've always felt like I sit in a strange place between two worlds. On one side, there's the world of books, logic, and study. My mother lives there. She studies the paranormal the way a scientist studies cells under a microscope. She devours every book, every article, every scrap of information on ghosts, spirits, angels, demons, energies, you name it. If it's a paranormal topic, she knows something about it. If it's an obscure subject, she probably knows almost everything about it. She's spiritual, but her knowledge is built from reading and research, not from psychic visions or anything like that. She looks at the unseen with the mind of a scholar. On the other side, there's the world of pure experience. My father lived there, even if he didn't like to admit it. He was incredibly psychic. He saw full apparitions, actual people, clear as day, who were later proven to have been real people who had once lived. Things he saw and knew were verified, explained, and confirmed. He had a gift that many would kill for, but he denied it completely. He brushed off every strange thing that happened as nothing. He pretended the paranormal wasn't real. It never made sense to me, someone who could see so much but chose to shut their eyes. Then there's me. I've always been a creative type. My mind is loud and colorful, full of ideas, images, and stories. It's easy for me to say, "Oh, that was just my imagination," because honestly, my imagination never sleeps. I've had a few strange things happen in my life, things that made my skin crawl and my heart pound, but I've always tried to write them off as dreams, mood, or my mind entertaining itself when it's bored. Most of the time, I've managed to convince myself that I'm just a bit dramatic or nutty, as I like to say. I'm not the kind of person who runs around claiming to see ghosts. I don't label myself psychic. I don't introduce myself with, "Hi, I see spirits." I actually work hard to be rational about what I experience. But when I've shared some of my stories with very close friends, people who know me well and know I'm not trying to get attention, more than one of them has said, "You sound like you have a piece of your dad's gift." I still go back and forth on that. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I can't deny everything. Some things I've seen and felt are too clear, too solid, too sharp to blame on a bored brain. There are a few experiences that stand out in my memory, like bright pins on a dark map. As time goes by, they don't fade. If anything, they become more defined. I always thought that if I ever shared any of my stories, I'd start with this one. It happened a few years ago, when I was about 20. At the time, I was living in a small flat in the woods just outside town with my partner. The flat was technically on the same property as his family's main house, but it wasn't right next door. It sat a few hundred meters away, tucked among trees and bushes, with a narrow track leading between the two places. I remember loving the quiet at first. In the daytime, the woods were peaceful. The light filtered through the leaves, birds called from unseen branches, and the air smelled like earth and sap. It felt like our own little world, slightly apart from everyone else, like the flat had slipped a step sideways from reality. But at night, it was different. When the sun went down, the trees stopped looking friendly and turned into tall, dark shapes with twisting arms. The wind threaded itself through the branches and howled around the house in strange tones. When storms rolled in, everything creaked and groaned. The roof moaned under the force of the wind. The walls gave small cracks and pops, and little night animals scratched around outside in the darkness. You'd hear claws on wood, rustles in the leaves, and the occasional thud of something small jumping or landing. When the sun retired and shadows took over, those same trees that looked so pretty in the daytime cast long, eerie shapes against the windows and walls. It could be unnerving if you let your mind run too far. Still, I wasn't alone. I had my partner, and I loved him. That made the weird nights worth it. We had been together for a while, not some short teenage fling, but a proper relationship with plans. There was talk of getting engaged. We shared bills, shared a bed, shared secrets. I was close to his family too. His parents lived in the main house on the same property, and I spent enough time there that it almost felt like my second home. His mom, especially, felt like a second mother to me. She and I clicked in a way that made me feel safe and welcome. His grandmother, though, passed away a few years before I came into the picture. She had been deeply loved and is still sorely missed. In her last years, she'd lived in the very flat where my partner and I were now staying. They'd moved her there so she could be close to the family, but still have her own space. After she passed, my partner moved in. Even after we'd been there for a good while, everyone still called it her flat. It was never just the flat. It was Gran's place or her place. They would say things like, "She would have really liked you," and "You should have met her." They often joked that if she didn't approve of me, I'd certainly know by now. There was always this feeling that she was somewhere near, still very much part of the family. I remember feeling oddly happy about that. I liked the idea of this kind, loving grandmother watching from somewhere unseen and approving of me. I wished I could have met her in person, but part of me felt like I had, or like I might still. The family openly believed that she lingered from time to time. They would casually mention feeling her around or make comments like, "I think Mom was with us yesterday." Nobody said it in a dramatic way. It was just part of their normal life, like talking about someone who'd gone on a long trip but still kept calling. When I was alone in the flat, there were moments where I felt like I wasn't truly alone. The feeling was soft, not heavy or scary, more like the sense that someone had just walked out of the room or was standing behind a door, listening gently. Sometimes it felt like a quiet kind of company, very faint but kind. Never threatening, never angry, just present. Every now and then, I would talk out loud while I did things, especially when I was by myself. I'd say simple, everyday things like, "Well, today was a bit rough," or "I'll make tea in a minute," or "Your family misses you a lot." It wasn't like I was having full conversations with thin air, but I'd say little bits and pieces. It was more like talking out of habit, just in case someone was listening who I couldn't see. I had no huge past record with spirits, and I doubted myself all the time. So part of me felt silly, but another part of me thought, what's the harm? If she was there, I liked the idea that she might feel included. My life in that flat was mostly happy, but eventually a rough patch came. My partner and I started to drift. It wasn't immediate. It was more like a slow, quiet pulling apart, the kind you don't even notice at first. We stopped seeing eye to eye on certain things. Small disagreements turned into bigger ones. Old habits that used to be cute started to become frustrating. We were still together, but something had changed between us. I didn't handle it well. I have a bad habit, when things go wrong, of going a bit mentally dark. My thoughts spiral. I think the worst. I shut down instead of talking calmly. I become hard to reason with. Instead of saying, "I'm scared," I turn that fear into anger or silence. Instead of asking for comfort, I pull away and build walls in my head. As this kept happening again and again, it slowly pushed us further apart. The more distant I felt from him, the more stuck I felt in my own mind. Over time, I started to sink into a depressed, heavy state. My thoughts weren't just sad, they became dark. I started thinking about my future in a bleak way. I started wondering if anything would ever feel simple again. The relationship that once brought me joy now felt like a maze. Then came one particular night. We'd had a rough, tense day. Late that night, we ended up in yet another stressful exchange. We didn't exactly scream at each other, but there was a lot of frustration, raised voices, sharp words. Things were said out of fear, out of hurt. We both went around in circles. Nothing got fixed. By the end of it, we were both upset and tired. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the bedroom area in a dark mood. And when I say dark, I don't just mean angry at him. I mean dark towards myself. My mind was in a place that didn't feel like me. Normally, I'm a bright, bubbly person. I laugh loudly. I make jokes. I try to see the good in things. But that night, all of that felt buried under something heavy and cold. Before I tell you what happened next, it might help to picture the layout of the flat. It was one of those small granny flats that doesn't really have many walls. It was open and compact, with just enough separation between areas to mark them out. The kitchenette, lounge, and bedroom were all essentially in one big open space. The only real divider between the lounge and the bedroom was a partial half wall that didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. You could see over it easily. There was a single, more private bathroom tucked away to the side, but the rest of the flat felt like one shared space. There was nowhere to fully shut a door and be completely alone, except maybe the bathroom. That night, I walked out of the bedroom and into the lounge area, my thoughts swirling. I didn't want to sit alone in the dark, so as I moved, I flicked on the lounge room light. The familiar glow filled the room, pushing back the shadows that clung to the corners. The couches, the table, the scattered things on the floor, all of it became clear and sharp. I dropped onto the couch heavily, folding my arms and sinking into my own thoughts. I sat there, brooding, replaying the argument, replaying all the little moments that had led up to it, picking apart everything as if that would somehow help. My mind went darker and darker. A particularly bad thought moved through my head. It wasn't just sad, it was genuinely dark, and it was directed at myself. It was the kind of thought I never used to have about myself, the kind that flashes up when you feel like you're at the bottom and there's nowhere lower to go. For a moment, I started to entertain it. I sat there, staring at nothing, starting to imagine the worst, starting to think about giving up, starting to drift into a place my usual self would never willingly go. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff in my mind, looking down and thinking, what if? Then everything changed in a few seconds. I heard a loud pop. It yanked me out of my thoughts instantly. The sound was sharp and close, like something electrical snapping or glass being hit. I looked up, and it was as though everything moved in slow motion from that point on. It was one of those moments where your brain records every detail because it knows something important is happening. I watched the lounge room light. It wasn't a normal screw-in bulb. It was one of those bulbs with two small metal pegs that slot into grooves in the fixture. You push it in and twist it slightly to lock it in place. That's the only way it can stay connected and receive power. As I stared, I saw the bulb twist. It turned ever so slightly, just enough to release those two pegs from their grooves. Then, still fully lit, it fell out of the ceiling fitting. It did not go out when it came loose, it did not flicker, it stayed on. Halfway between the ceiling and the floor, the bulb shattered. Still glowing, it broke into pieces. The room went dark in an instant as the light source was suddenly destroyed. I heard the sharp sound of glass exploding and then the tinkling scatter of shards hitting the ground. The pieces rained down and bounced around on the floor, rolling a little, scraping faintly on the surface before they settled. The flat was now completely dark, except maybe for whatever faint glow seeped in from outside. But I barely noticed that. My whole body went cold. The moment the bulb shattered and the room went dark, I felt something else. It was like a wave of cold dread swept into the lounge from all sides at once. The air felt thick. There was a sudden, overpowering sense of a presence in the room. Not just a vague feeling. You know when someone stands too close behind you and you can feel them without seeing them? It was like that, but bigger. It felt like something tall and serious was standing near me, in front of me, around me, filling the entire lounge. It didn't feel kind in that moment. It felt intense, like a warning. The feeling that rushed through me was very clear, like being caught doing something you shouldn't, like someone grabbing you by the shoulders and shaking you awake. It was as if the air itself was saying, "Stop. Don't go down that path," I shrieked. It wasn't a graceful little scream. It was loud and panicked. I wanted to jump up and run to the bedroom, but I couldn't. The glass was everywhere. I could hear and feel small shards near my feet. If I stepped off the couch barefoot, I could cut myself badly. So I stayed frozen in place, shaking so hard my teeth almost chattered. I sat there in the dark, shaking, feeling surrounded, my breath coming fast. I called out for my partner. My voice sounded too loud in the small space. From the bedroom, I heard him move, then sit up. "What happened?" he called, his voice sleepy and confused. He thought I'd dropped something or broken something by accident. I could barely form the words to answer him. Even though only a few seconds had passed, My mind kept replaying what I had seen. The light twisting by itself, the bulb falling, still glowing, then breaking in midair, the split second before everything went black and that heavy, cold feeling hit me. I'm not an electrician, but I know enough to say this. Those lights cannot stay on once the pegs disconnect from the power. If you move it out of the grooves, the connection breaks. There is no power. It should turn off right away. For that bulb to twist loose, fall, and remain lit until the moment it shattered didn't make sense. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just a faulty bulb dropping out. It felt like something else entirely. The sense of being in trouble was so strong that it almost felt like judgment. It was as if someone had seen inside my head and decided they were not going to sit and watch me slip any further. It scared me so badly that it scrubbed away the dark thoughts I'd been entertaining only seconds earlier. In their place came something else. Remorse, fear for myself, and a sudden, sharp awareness of how my actions might hurt others. Eventually, the intense feeling in the room began to fade. The cold, heavy atmosphere thinned. I was still nervous, but my body slowly stopped shaking. I was able to climb carefully off the couch, avoiding the glass as best I could, and make my way back to the bedroom. I don't remember every word I said to my partner. I only know I was still shaken and trying to explain something that sounded crazy out loud. Later, when I finally lay back down in bed, I pulled the covers up to my chin like a child and closed my eyes. In my head, over and over again, I prayed to St. Michael, the archangel I've always felt drawn to. I asked him to keep me safe, to keep the flat safe, to keep my partner and his family safe. I asked for strength. I asked for protection, and somewhere inside myself I also sent out a kind of apology. Not just to God or to St. Michael, but to whoever, or whatever, had just shocked me back into myself. I apologized for the darkness of my thoughts. I silently promised I wouldn't let myself slip that far again, that I wouldn't entertain ideas that would hurt me or the people who loved me. I meant it, even if I still didn't fully understand what had just happened. Now, years later, that night doesn't haunt me in a painful way. I don't lie awake replaying it in fear. But it hasn't faded either. It sits clearly in my memory, sharp and untouched by time. I still can see that bulb twisting in its socket and falling while lit. I still can feel that cold wave of warning in the room. It's like a sign that was burned into my life at a moment when I needed it. I don't live in that flat anymore. Life changed. My relationship ended. I grew apart from that family over time. We don't really keep in touch now, which is sad in its own way, but life goes on and people drift. Even so, I still think about their grandmother sometimes. I think about all the times they joked that she was still around, watching, making sure everyone was okay. I think about how they said I would know if she didn't like me. I think about how I sometimes felt company when I was alone. I wonder if it really was her, still hanging close to the home she'd lived in near the end of her life, still watching over the family she loved. I can't say for certain that it was her that night. I can't say with absolute confidence that she was the one who knocked that bulb out of its socket and shocked me out of my dangerous thoughts. I don't have proof that the presence in the room belonged to her. It could have been something else. A guardian, a guide, a relative, or something nameless. But in my heart, I like to think that there was some truth to their suspicions. That maybe, just maybe, someone who loved them very much was standing nearby, keeping an eye on things. Maybe she saw me sitting there in the lounge, sinking into a dark place and considering an idea that would have hurt me and, by extension, her family. Maybe she decided she was not going to let that happen quietly. Maybe she did the only thing she could to shake me, quite literally, out of it. Or maybe it was just a freak electrical accident, bad wiring, and my own mind filling in the rest because I was in a fragile state. I don't know, and that's the honest truth. But I do know this. That night, something happened that pulled me back from a dangerous edge. Something slammed into my awareness at exactly the right moment to stop me from going further down a road I should never have walked. Whether it was a warning from a grandmother who loved her family, a gentle nudge from something higher, or some strange mix of both, I am grateful for it. And even if I can't be sure what it was, I will never forget how it felt. In April 2012, I gave birth to my son, Leo. Becoming a mother changed everything for me, and from the very beginning, I felt a strong, protective bond with him. At that time, I was still living with my parents, so Leo and I shared my bedroom. His bassinet was right next to my bed, close enough that I could reach out and touch him any time during the night. For the first 2 or 3 months, everything felt normal. My room was just my room, the same space I had slept in for years, now filled with baby blankets, nappies, tiny clothes, and that soft baby smell that seems to cling to everything. Leo slept beside me, and I'd often wake up just to watch his chest rise and fall, even when he was perfectly fine. I was a new mom, so I worried like all new moms do, but nothing felt out of the ordinary then. After a couple of months, my parents and I agreed it was time for Leo to move into his own room. It wasn't far, just down the hall, but for me it felt like a big step. We set up his cot in there, arranged his toys and books, folded his clothes into drawers. I wanted it to be a calm, safe place for him, a little space of his own in the house. That was when I started to notice things that didn't quite make sense. The first thing was the temperature. Whenever I went into Leo's room, it often felt freezing in certain spots. Sometimes it was just one area of the room, like a cold patch hanging in the air near the cot or by the door. Other times it felt like the entire room had suddenly dropped several degrees, even when the rest of the house was warm and comfortable. I would walk in from the hallway, where it felt fine, and step into his room, only to be hit by this strange chill. At first, I thought it might be a draft. I checked the windows, the vents, the walls, everything I could think of. But there was no obvious gap, no open window, nothing that could explain why that room was so cold when the rest of the house was not. Sometimes, I would stand in the doorway and literally feel the line where the temperature changed, as if I were crossing from one environment to another. The weird part was that Leo himself was always warm. No matter how cold the room felt to me, whenever I put my hand on his chest or his back, he felt perfectly fine. His cheeks were warm, his little hands and feet were cozy under his blankets. He never shivered, never seemed uncomfortable. His temperature was normal whenever I checked it. It was like whatever was happening in the room didn't touch him at all. Not long after that, something else started happening that caught my attention. I had a video baby monitor that I used constantly. Like many new mums, I relied on it for peace of mind. I could be in the lounge or the kitchen and still see him on the little screen, see his chest rising, see if he'd kicked his blanket off or if he'd woken up. Sometimes, I'd switch it on just to look at him because I missed him, even if he'd only been in there for 5 minutes. One day, I turned on the monitor and saw Leo lying in his cot, laughing. He wasn't just smiling randomly like babies do sometimes. He was properly laughing and smiling, his eyes bright and focused. His gaze wasn't wandering aimlessly around the room. He was clearly following something. His eyes moved as if he were tracking someone walking from one side of the room to the other, or floating above him. He would giggle, pause, and then gurgle away, as if he were answering someone, then stop and listen again. It was like watching a conversation I could only see one half of. This continued on different days. Sometimes I'd turn on the screen and see him lying there, eyes fixed on what looked like an empty space in the room, wide awake and happy, babbling and laughing. His face would light up, and he'd stare so intently at whatever it was that I almost expected to see something appear on the screen too, but I never did. There was nothing there that I could see, no toys moving, no shadows, no lights, just Leo and his invisible friend. I also started to hear footsteps in and around his room. They weren't loud, stomping footsteps, but definite sounds of someone moving. Sometimes it sounded like soft steps crossing the floor near the cot. Other times it was more like someone pacing just outside his door or in the hallway near his room. Occasionally, I'd hear a creak in the floorboards, just in that area, even when everyone else was seated in another part of the house. Whenever I went to look, there was never anyone there. No one had walked past. No one had gone into his room. Leo would still be lying happily in his cot, either asleep or playing with his hands. There was never anything visibly out of place. After a while, I stopped rushing to check every single time because it became almost normal. I started to wonder if there was a spirit or something in his room. At first, that idea terrified me. The thought of anything unseen around my baby was frightening. But when I really thought about it, I realized Leo seemed to like whatever it was. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't crying, he wasn't waking up disturbed, and he wasn't showing any signs of discomfort. Instead, he laughed, smiled, and followed something with his eyes like it was entertaining him. So I made a quiet decision in my mind. If it was a spirit, it probably wasn't dangerous, at least not to him. Life moved on, and in November 2012, things changed again. Leo and I moved into a unit with my fiancée. It was a big step for us as a family, and I was excited to build a life together in our own place. The unit was smaller than my parents' house, but cozy enough. We brought Leo's things, set up his room again, arranged our furniture, and did all the normal things people do when they move somewhere new. At first, it was just about adjusting to a different layout, finding where everything belonged, and settling into new routines. After a few months of living there, I began to notice a different kind of strange. It wasn't in Leo's room this time, it was in the bathroom. Whenever I went in there, especially when I was alone, I'd get this heavy feeling come over me. I could walk into the bathroom feeling perfectly normal, and within a few seconds, it was like someone had dropped a blanket of sadness over me. My chest would feel tight. My mood would suddenly sink. Sometimes I would feel a rush of anger for no reason, too. Irritation, frustration, like all the negative emotions had been turned up, even if nothing had happened to trigger them. It was worst when I had a shower. I'd stand under the water and feel it creeping up on me, this wave of sadness and anger mixed together. Sometimes I'd find myself thinking about things that hurt me, or things that made me angry, even if I hadn't been thinking about them before stepping in. It got to the point where, before every shower, I would wonder, is it going to happen again this time? Sometimes it didn't, but often it did. I tried to ignore it, tried to write it off as stress or hormones, anything logical, but it kept happening exactly there and almost nowhere else. Around this same time, another change started to show, and it involved Leo. Before we moved into this unit, Leo loved baths, loved them. Bath time was one of the happiest parts of our routine. He would splash around, kick his legs, smile, and laugh. The water relaxed him. If he'd been fussy during the day, putting him in the bath practically switched him into a calmer mood. I never had to fight him to get in. It was easy. Then once we settled into the new place, all of that changed. Very suddenly, Leo started hating baths. Not just a little fussing or a whimper or two, full-on terror. The moment he saw the bath and the water running, he would scream. His eyes would go wide with fear, his body would tense up, and he'd cling to me as if something terrible was about to happen. It was a completely different reaction from what I was used to seeing. Nothing bad had ever happened to him with water. He'd never slipped, never choked, never experienced any kind of trauma in the bath. It wasn't like he'd been scared by a loud noise in there or had a painful accident. The fear just appeared out of nowhere, like someone had flipped a switch inside him. I kept thinking, why now? Why here? One night, a few weeks ago, something happened that made me pay even closer attention. My fiancée and I were outside on the balcony, just off the living room, having a cigarette together. It was quiet, just the two of us talking softly while Leo slept inside. The unit was still. The TV was off, and we weren't playing any music. It was one of those calm, normal nights. Then we heard a loud crash from inside. It was a sudden, sharp noise, the kind that makes your stomach drop for a second. My fiancé and I looked at each other, then quickly went back inside to see what had happened. We were expecting to find something on the floor, maybe a picture frame knocked over, maybe something heavy falling off a shelf. But nothing obvious was out of place. Instead, we found a couple of Leo's toys going off by themselves. They were playing music and sounds, the little electronic tunes they make when you press their buttons. Only, no one had pressed them. They weren't near any edge where they could have fallen and triggered themselves, and nothing had bumped into them. They were just going off. We checked around the room. No shelves had collapsed. No doors had slammed into anything. There was nothing on the floor that shouldn't have been. The loud crash that had sent us inside had no clear source. We laughed nervously about it, the way people do when they're a bit unsettled but don't want to admit it. We joked that maybe one of Leo's toys had decided to come to life, or that we had a friendly ghost having a play. Then we tried to brush it off and carried on with our evening. Later that night, when we finally decided to head to bed, things got stranger. As we were making our way to the bedroom, one of Leo's toys started going off again. At first, this wouldn't have surprised me too much after what had happened earlier, except this particular toy was broken. It had stopped working some time ago and wouldn't play any music or sounds at all, no matter what buttons you pressed. This time, it was playing normally. The little lights flashed, the tunes played, and it behaved exactly the way it had when it was brand new. My fiancé and I just stared at it. We both knew it was broken. We both knew it hadn't worked in ages. There was no sudden change of batteries, no repairs, nothing different about it. It should have stayed silent. The next day, it stopped working again. We tried turning it on and pressing its buttons, but nothing happened. It was back to being broken, just like before. That was when I really started to question what was going on around us. By this point, I had already been feeling strange in the bathroom and had noticed Leo's sudden terror of the bath. Now we had toys going off on their own, including one that was supposed to be dead. I started to wonder if maybe there was a spirit of a child around us. It would make sense in a way. The toys being triggered, the music playing, the sense of someone playing around rather than trying to cause harm. I couldn't shake one particular idea. What if the spirit had something to do with water? Maybe, I thought, it was a child who had drowned, or someone whose death was connected to water. It would explain why Leo suddenly felt so afraid of the bath. Children are sensitive. Maybe he was feeling the fear that belonged to someone else. Maybe he had picked up on their emotions the way a radio picks up a broadcast. At the same time, I wasn't entirely sure if this was the same presence from Leo's first room at my parents' house or a completely different one. Back in that house, there had been cold spots, laughter, and invisible company. But there hadn't been any fear of water. I hadn't felt that same heavy sadness or anger in the bathroom there either. This unit felt like it had its own energy. Maybe the two places had different guests, or maybe the same one had followed us and changed how it showed itself. Because I work part-time and my fiancé works full-time, I'm at home more than he is. That means I'm the one who notices the little things that happen during the day when the unit is quiet. I've heard unexplained noises when I know no one else is moving around. I've heard what sounds like faint whispering at times, too soft to make out words, but not just the pipes or the neighbors. And consistently, that heavy feeling hangs around the bathroom area like a cloud that won't lift. On top of that, my belongings have started going missing in strange ways. I'll put something down, a key, a hairbrush, a piece of clothing, and later when I go back for it, it won't be there. I'll search the whole place, frustrated and sure I must be losing my mind. Sometimes I eventually find the item exactly where I knew I left it, as if it had never moved, even though I swear I checked that spot a dozen times already. Other times, I find the missing thing in completely odd places where I would never normally put it. Tucked behind something. Buried under something unrelated. Slipped into a spot that doesn't make any logical sense. Things also fall down randomly. Items that have been sitting securely where we put them, sometimes for weeks, will suddenly fall for no reason. No one bumps the shelf, no one slams a door, there's no strong breeze, they just drop. It's not constant, but it's often enough that I notice. All of this together paints a picture that feels less like a horror movie and more like someone trying to get attention. I can't shake the sense that, if this is a spirit, they aren't trying to truly frighten me in a cruel way. It feels more like little pranks. Toys going off, things disappearing and reappearing, random crashes and noises. It's unsettling, yes, but not violently aggressive. At the same time, there's a sadness that seems to hang around. The way I feel in the bathroom, sad and angry, heavy and emotional, makes me think that whoever or whatever is there might not be at peace. Sometimes I imagine a child spirit, confused and lonely, drawn to my son because he is small and full of life. Maybe they play with his toys because they remember doing the same thing when they were alive. Maybe the bath scares them because of something that happened to them, and that fear spills over into Leo's heart when we bring him near the water. I don't know for sure. What I do know is that Leo still reacts strongly to the bath. The bathroom still holds that strange heaviness for me. The toys have behaved in ways that defy logic, and there are sounds and movements in this unit that I can't easily explain. Whoever it is, if it is someone, seems more interested in playing tricks and being noticed than in doing real harm. But underneath the tricks and the noises, there is something else too. A feeling, quiet but persistent, that they are sad. I've noticed strange things all through my life. For a long time, I used to shrug them off as coincidences, weird moments, or just my imagination, and then move on. But as more and more little things piled up, they stopped feeling like nothing and started feeling like a pattern. I'm 18 now, born in 1994, and I've lived in the same house in Melbourne my whole life. My mum moved into this house 10 years before I was born, so this place has a long history with us. Sometimes I wonder if that's part of it. One of the first odd things I remember happened when I was about 10 years old. That night I just could not get to sleep. I've always had trouble sleeping, but this was different. I wasn't just restless or bored. I had this very strong sense that I was waiting for something or someone. It was like that feeling you get when you know somebody is about to arrive at your house, and you keep listening for their car, only there was no one coming. I couldn't shake it. I told my mum that night, I feel like I'm waiting for something. She took it seriously because I was really anxious. I lay in bed for hours, turning over and over, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows, listening to the house creak. Finally, my body started to get heavy and my eyes began to close. Just as I was drifting off, I felt something. It was like a cold breeze, but not on my face or my arms. It was right on my lips, a soft, cold touch like a kiss, then gone. It wasn't just cool air in the room, it was focused, almost gentle. For a second I froze, my heart pounding, and then, strangely, I felt calm. After that cold kiss, I fell asleep and slept through the night. The next day I felt shaken up. I kept thinking, what if that was someone saying goodbye? The feeling of waiting, the sudden cold touch, the way I passed out afterwards, it all sat heavy in my mind. I was so worried that I convinced my mom to ring my grandmother just to check if she was okay. I thought maybe it had something to do with her. She was fine. Nothing bad had happened. So I told myself it was weird and then tried to push it to the back of my mind. Around that same age, something else strange happened, but in a very different way. The night before I was due to compete in an open water swimming race, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was in the water, swimming hard and winning. I could feel how tired my arms were, how strong the waves were, all of it. Then I reached the beach and got out of the water. Instead of the finish line being nearby, there was this long run up the sand to the actual finish. I started running, legs heavy and slow, and in the dream, I lost my lead right there on the beach. I woke up with the dream clear in my head. I told my mum about it in the morning. We both thought it was just nerves making me dream about the race. But later that day, when I actually raced, it happened almost exactly the same way. I came out of the water in front, just like in the dream, but they had put the finish line way up on the beach. I had to run further than I expected. My legs felt weak, I got overtaken, and I lost the win right there on the sand, just like I'd seen in my sleep. When I told my mum afterwards, she looked really surprised. It wasn't a vague feeling, it was like watching my dream replay in real life. Little things like that kept happening. Sometimes they were with me, sometimes with my mum. She once told me about an incident when we went to America. We walked into a diner she had supposedly never been to before in her life. As soon as she stepped in, she said she recognized it. Not just a little bit. She felt she had been there before. The layout, the counter, the feeling of the place, everything. But she hadn't. It was her first time in that town, in that country. She still talks about it now and then, like a memory from somewhere that doesn't quite line up with the timeline of her life. As I got older, the strange things didn't stop. They just changed. Last year I had just finished a tutoring session and was about to get into my mum's car. I glanced at the gear stick area and saw something behind it, near the joystick. It was a little combi van toy. I love combis. I collect them. Die-cast models, pictures, anything I can get my hands on. So as soon as I saw it, I picked it up and asked my mom, "What's this?" I thought it was cute and assumed she'd found it for me. She looked at me and said, "I thought it was yours." I had never seen this combi before in my life. It was made of rubber, not metal, and it was in my favorite color, blue. Not a bright new blue, but worn like it had been handled a lot. The color was rubbed in some places, like someone had kept it for a long time and carried it around. It felt like an old favorite toy, the kind a child might keep in their pocket. Neither of us knew where it had come from. It just appeared in the car, and we couldn't trace it back to anyone. It was exactly the kind of thing I liked, in my favorite color, and in a style I didn't even own yet. Another odd thing happened around my mid-year exams last year, during my final year of school. A few days earlier, I'd skinned my knuckles during life-saving, and they were sore and raw. Because I write a lot during exams, I was worried they'd hurt and distract me. I use these special band-aids with silver in them that I really like. They're flexible and good for movement. My mom went out to buy me some, but the only type she could get were the plastic ones. They work, but they're not as flexible, and I knew they'd make holding a pen annoying. Still, I told myself I'd deal with it. That night, I put the box of plastic band-aids in my bag in my bedroom. I opened the box and put one on to wear overnight, so it was definitely already opened. In the morning, I came into the kitchen and saw another box of band-aids on the table. Without really thinking about it, I picked that box up and put it in my bag too, not remembering I already had one in there. I thought it was the same box. On the way to school, while my mom was driving, I reached into my bag to get a band-aid out. When I took the box out, I noticed it was still sealed with the little glue tab intact. That confused me. I thought, hang on, I opened this last night. Why is it sealed? I looked at the front of the box more closely and realized it wasn't the plastic ones at all. It was the fabric ones. The good ones I actually wanted. The box I had opened last night, the plastic type, was still in my bag as well. I ended up with both. The original opened plastic box and a sealed box of fabric band-aids that nobody remembered buying. I mentioned how weird it was, and my mom said, half joking, half serious, "Someone must be taking care of you." That stuck with me. I have 7 cats at home, and they are like guard dogs. They notice everything. If someone even stepped onto our property, they'd react. No one could sneak into our house, leave a new box of band-aids and a combi toy, and get out without someone or some animal noticing. My parents didn't buy those extra things. I didn't either, but they turned up exactly when I needed them, or when they fit me perfectly. A while after that, something much more intense happened. I was up at my dad's property. It's very rural. The next-door neighbors are a good 3 to 5 minute walk away. It's quiet and spread out, the kind of place where you hear every little sound because there isn't much background noise. I was staying there alone. Just a few days earlier, his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend had broken into the house. Because of that, my mom and my half-siblings, from my dad's side, had been staying there too to keep things safe. But they all had to go back to work, and I was on holidays and had just come back from Sydney, so I stayed there by myself for one night. I was nervous, to say the least. Knowing that someone had broken into that same house days before made me jump at every creak. I stayed up until 4 in the morning, too wired to sleep, convinced that the ex-girlfriend might come back. Eventually, my body forced me to sleep. I was exhausted. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up again. What woke me was the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway. The lounge room I was sleeping in was the closest room to the driveway, and you could hear anyone approaching from the front or back of the house very clearly. At first, I thought it might be one of the horses walking on the gravel. The sound was slow and heavy, almost like hooves, but it didn't quite match. It sounded too much like human footsteps. I grabbed my phone and rang the next-door neighbor. I asked her if she could see the pure white horse in the front yard from her place. I thought maybe the horse had gotten out and that was making the noise. She took a look and said no, she couldn't see any horse. Then I started hearing footsteps on the dirt out the front of the house, like someone walking slowly along the front wall. At that point, I really started to panic. Because of the break-in days before, I thought it might be my dad's ex-girlfriend back again. I called the local police and told them what I was hearing. Then I rang my mom because I was freaking out and didn't want to be alone, even on the phone. As I was talking to her, I started to hear footsteps around the back of the house. The only way for someone to walk from the front of the house to the back is to cross the gravel driveway. Gravel is loud. You cannot walk on it without making noise, but I hadn't heard anyone cross it between the front and the back. 1 minute, the footsteps were at the front, the next, they were at the back, with no sound in between. That made my skin crawl. I ended up ringing emergency services again. The police came and checked the property and the house. They walked around the house outside and made the same kind of sound on the dirt that I had heard earlier. They looked everywhere they could, inside and out, and they didn't find anyone. After they left, they did another drive around the back of the property on the road, shining all their spotlights onto the land and towards the house. A little while later, I heard something heavy get dragged. It went on longer than any normal gust of wind could have caused. It wasn't a quick scrape, it was a long dragging sound. I called the police back again, and they returned to check all around the house one more time. Again, they found nothing and no one. I don't know what was out there that night. A real person would have left tracks or been seen by the police. A horse would have been visible. The sounds were real. The fear was real. But there was nothing to point to. Not long after that, I got a rescue puppy as a Christmas present. She's very special to me. She had been abused and beaten before I got her. The rescue group brought her down from another state because they thought she and I would be a perfect match based on what I'd said and how she was. I had been searching everywhere for the right dog, and when I saw her picture, I felt a connection immediately. She's my baby now. She misses me when I go away, and she follows me around the house like a shadow. Recently, she started barking for no obvious reason. Not all the time, just randomly. She'll be relaxed one moment and then suddenly let out a single, sharp woof. Then she pauses, looks around carefully, sometimes positioning herself in front of me like she's trying to protect me from something I can't see. Then she'll bark again, woof, pause, woof, and so on. A few times in a row, always alert and tense. She has been trained not to bark unnecessarily and usually knows she shouldn't. So when she does it, she looks torn, like she knows she's going against what she's been taught, but feels she has to anyway. Sometimes she even cowers a little while still barking, as if she's scared and brave at the same time. What makes it stranger is that my cats don't react at all when this happens. I have 7 cats, and they are usually very sensitive. They notice the tiniest movements, sounds, smells. Normally, if something was outside or someone was at the door, they would head straight to the source, or at least look alert. But when my puppy behaves this way, the cats just carry on with whatever they're doing, as if nothing is there. It's like she's hearing or seeing something on a different level than they are. I've always had a way with animals. People comment on it all the time. They'll say, "My dog never lets strangers pat him," and then he'll come straight over and lean against me. Or, "My cat doesn't like people," and then the cat will jump into my lap. It's like animals trust me quickly. I don't know if that's related, but it feels connected to everything else somehow. There's one more thing, small but unsettling. Twice in the last couple of years, I've woken up with 2 bite marks. At first I thought they were just mozzie bites, but they looked different. They were spaced apart in a way that didn't quite fit how mosquitoes usually bite. One time they were on my neck, 2 marks side by side. Another time, they were on my leg in the same kind of pattern. I want to be clear, this is not me trying to make it into some vampire fantasy. I'm not into that. I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, it must be a vampire. I just notice things and look for logical explanations, and these didn't feel normal. Looking back at everything, the cold kiss when I was 10, the dream that came true, the weird déjà vu my mom had in America, the random blue combi that appeared in our car, the extra box of Band-Aids that turned up just when I needed it, the footsteps around the rural house that no one could explain, the dog barking at nothing, the pets that trust me, the strange bite marks. I start to wonder. Sometimes I think maybe someone is taking care of me. Maybe someone is leaving me little gifts, guiding me, protecting me. Other times, I think I might just be reading too much into random things that happen to everyone. I'm very open-minded, but I also like proof. I don't want to be the person who jumps to wild conclusions with no evidence. I don't want to make something huge out of nothing. But at the same time, I can't ignore how all these things have made me feel. They don't feel like nothing. They feel like small nudges, warnings, signs, or touches from something, or someone I can't see. So I'm left here, in the same house I've lived in all my life, surrounded by my animals, thinking back over the years and quietly asking myself the same question over and over. This was the second of my many small random experiences, but it was much darker than most of the others. In some ways, it feels like it was more my partner's experience than mine, but I was right in the middle of it, and it has stayed with me. It's also a little tricky and uncomfortable to talk about, because it touches on a time in my life where my mind and emotions were not in a good place. It happened a few years ago, back when I was living in that small, creaky house in the woods with my partner. I've talked about that place before. It was a little cabin out of town, tucked away among the trees. The house itself was old and a bit worn, with floorboards that complained at every step, doors that liked to swell and stick in damp weather, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. The woods around us were beautiful in the daytime, with sunlight filtering through the branches and birds calling from somewhere high above. At night, though, those same trees turned into looming shadows, and the sounds became strange and unsettling. The whole place could feel very isolated and eerie if you let your imagination wander. I was in my early 20s then, still trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted out of life. On the surface, I had a lot to be thankful for. I was living with someone I loved deeply. We had our own little home away from town, our own routine, our own jokes and habits. But inside, I was going through a time where everything felt off. My thoughts were scattered and confused, my emotions were all over the place, and I felt unsure about my direction and even my purpose. I think most people go through some kind of phase like that at least once. A time where the ground under your feet doesn't feel stable and you don't really recognize yourself. Instead of dealing with it in a healthy way, I started slipping into a negative headspace. I became moody in a way that wasn't normal for me. I was unkind in little ways, snappy for no reason, defensive when no one was attacking me. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I played it up on purpose just to annoy the people around me, especially my partner. I got into this petty, stubborn mood where I poked and pushed just to see what would happen. I wasn't the most fun person to be around. I would pick fights over small things, say negative things just to say them, and sit in my own dark thoughts like they were a blanket I didn't want to take off. I didn't mess with anything obviously dark or disrespectful in a paranormal sense. I never did any rituals or tried to summon anything. I knew better than that and had enough respect for whatever unseen things might be out there. But the more I look back, the more I feel that sometimes you don't have to invite anything directly. If you spend enough time feeding negative thoughts, anger, and darkness in yourself, you become like a battery for that kind of energy. Maybe you open the door a crack without realizing it. At the time, I wouldn't have admitted that. But now, part of me wonders if that's exactly what I was doing. On the night this happened, I was in one of those moods. It was late, so late it was actually early. One of those nights where time blurs and you don't even notice the hours passing until you realize the sky is probably beginning to pale outside. I had been sulking, pushing my partner's buttons, being sharp and unpleasant when there was absolutely no need. He is, by nature, a gentle soul. He has a kind heart, a calm energy, and doesn't enjoy conflict. That night, I could feel him getting tired of my behavior, and honestly, I can't blame him. Eventually, he'd had enough. He stopped trying to reason with me, stopped trying to soothe or argue back. Instead, he quietly said he was going to bed. He turned off the lights and went to lie down, leaving the cabin in darkness except for whatever faint light squeezed in from outside. I remember feeling that sudden, heavy silence when the lights went out, the kind that makes you more aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. By that point, I was not just grumpy. I had slipped into this strange little mental cave. I felt angry, but not in a loud way. It was more like a deep, cold anger twisted up with sadness and confusion. I lay there in the dark, stewing in my own head, entertaining thoughts that were darker than my usual self would ever like to admit. I wasn't asleep. I remember clearly that I was awake the whole time. It felt like I had gone far away inside myself, drifting into a place where I didn't quite feel like me. What I remember from that night, from my point of view, is pretty simple. At some point, my partner turned me around in the bed so that I was facing away from him. I remember the feeling of his hands on me, moving my body so my back was towards him. Then he wrapped his arms around me and held me tightly. Not in a soft, cuddly way, but in a strong, almost crushing grip. He pulled me back against his chest and didn't let go. It stood out to me because that was so unlike him. He isn't rough or physical like that. He's gentle, careful, always worried about hurting me. But that night, he held me so hard it almost hurt. I couldn't turn to look at him because his arms were locked firmly around me. I wasn't struggling exactly, but I remember thinking it was strange that he wouldn't let me move. It felt like that went on for a long time, though time is strange in the dark. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. I just remember the pressure of his hold, his chest against my back, and the quiet of the room. Eventually, even with my mind all twisted up, I drifted off and fell asleep. When I woke up the next day, the memory of it was still there, but fuzzy around the edges. In the morning light, it all felt distant and almost silly. I was embarrassed about how I'd behaved the night before, about the moodiness, the arguments, the petty negativity. He, in his usual calm way, didn't make a big deal out of it. We sort of brushed it off as just me being a grump and him dealing with it. Neither of us dug into it much. Life went on. For a long time, we didn't talk about that night at all. Months passed. The weird energy around that time faded. I slowly came out of that negative phase and tried to be more like myself again. Our lives settled back into a more normal rhythm. We still lived in that same little house in the woods. The creaks and groans of the place were just part of the background again. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, many months later, we went to a small gathering with a few close friends. These friends were like-minded in the sense that they, like me, were interested in paranormal things. They weren't dramatic about it, but they enjoyed ghost stories, strange experiences, unexplained things. That night, we were all sitting together, comfortable and relaxed, probably with some snacks and drinks around, talking about this and that. At some point, someone pulled up a paranormal website, and we all took turns reading stories aloud. The room was full of that familiar mix of spooky curiosity and laughter. You know the feeling. Half this is fun, and half, okay, now I'm creeping myself out. My partner was there with me. He's always been open to listening about paranormal things, but not overly excited by them. He doesn't go out of his way to read ghost stories or watch scary movies. He isn't the type to sit up all night searching for haunted places online. But he's not closed off either. He would listen and nod and sometimes give a thoughtful comment. Eventually, the conversation shifted from stories on the screen to personal experiences. One of my friends asked if anyone there had ever had anything strange happen to them. People started sharing small things, odd noises, weird dreams, déjà vu moments. I think everyone expected me to say something, because they knew I'd had a few experiences. But what surprised me was when my partner spoke up. He said, quietly, that he had a story. Something about the way he said it made me turn and look at him immediately. He suddenly seemed uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure if he should be saying anything at all. This caught me off guard because I was sure that if he had any paranormal story to tell, he would have told me first, long before this night. He knew how interested I was in this stuff. The idea that he had a story I didn't know was odd. My friends encouraged him. They told him to go on, to share, that we were all listening. He hesitated for a bit, looking away from me, and then finally agreed to tell it. His voice was serious. Not dramatic, not showy, just quiet and serious. He said basically, "I've watched her face change into a snout with teeth." And he pointed at me. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. It sounded ridiculous out of context. I laughed in shock, expecting him to smile and shake his head and say he was only messing with me. But he didn't. His expression didn't change. His eyes didn't sparkle with that little glint he gets when he's teasing. He looked troubled, like he really wished he didn't have to say it. I know him very well. One thing about him is that he is not a storyteller. He doesn't exaggerate his experiences, he doesn't add dramatic details, and he doesn't lie to get a reaction out of people. If anything, he downplays things. He's the kind of person who will say it was fine about something that was actually a big deal. So for him to say something like that, in that tone, in front of other people, made my stomach drop. That was when that weird night in our cabin came flooding back into my mind. My friends leaned in, curious and a little uneasy, and asked him to explain. I stayed quiet, feeling suddenly cold, because even before he spoke again, I had this strange sense that I already knew more than I had let myself admit. What he described was different from the simple memory I had carried. From his point of view, that night had not just been me sulking and then being crushed in his arms. He told us that after he'd gone to bed that night, he had fallen into a light sleep. The house was dark, the kind of deep nighttime quiet that feels heavy on your skin. At some point, he was woken up by a low growling sound. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was close, right next to him. At first, he wasn't sure if he was imagining it or if it was actually happening. He turned to me and realized that the sound seemed to be coming from where I was. He reached out and shook me gently, telling me to cut it out, thinking I was making weird noises on purpose. When he did that, the growling stopped. I went quiet. I didn't respond, but I quieted down enough that he could tell himself it had just been some strange noise in my sleep. After a moment, he lay back down and tried to go back to sleep. Eventually, he drifted off again. Sometime later, he woke up again. This time, it wasn't a noise that woke him, but a feeling, a sense that something wasn't right. He opened his eyes and looked towards my side of the bed. What he saw made my skin crawl when he described it. Instead of finding me lying down beside him, he saw me crouched on top of the bed covers, up against the wall that the bed was pushed against. I was facing him, but my head was bowed slightly, so I was looking downward rather than straight at him. The picture he painted was not something I would ever intentionally do. I don't sleepwalk. I don't play creepy pranks in the middle of the night. It was completely out of character. At first, he thought I was messing around again, maybe trying to scare him. He told us that he spoke to me in a tired, annoyed voice, saying something like, "I'm not amused, stop it." When I didn't answer, he got more concerned. He sat up properly, really looking at me, trying to figure out what was going on. Then he said, I raised my head and looked at him, and as I did, the face he knew, my face, began to change. He struggled for words at this point in the story. You could see the discomfort on his face, not just because of what he saw, but also because he didn't like talking about it in front of me. He said that as he watched, it was like something was superimposed over my features. My face didn't disappear completely, but on top of it, another shape appeared. He saw what he described as a snout, long and animal-like, jutting out where my nose and mouth should have been. He saw pointed teeth, far sharper and longer than my own, flashing in what he could only call a wicked grin. It wasn't a kind smile or a neutral expression. It was cruel, wrong, something that did not belong on my face. He made it very clear that he wasn't saying my actual flesh twisted and morphed like in a movie. It was more like an image laid over my real face, like seeing something double exposed. But to him, in that moment, it was real enough. It terrified him. He told us that his whole body reacted before his brain could catch up. Pure instinct took over. The person he loved, the woman he shared a life with, was sitting there in the dark, with something horrifying overlaying her features. He did the first thing his heart told him to do. He lunged forward, grabbed me as quickly and tightly as he could, and flipped me around so that I was facing away from him. He pulled me back against his chest, wrapping his arms around me in the hardest hold he could manage. That was the moment that matches my memory. From my side, I remember suddenly being turned, feeling that tight, almost crushing hug, and being unable to look at him. I didn't know why he was holding me so hard. I just knew that he was. To him, that was the only thing he could think of to do. Stop whatever he was seeing by pulling me away from it, or pulling it away from me. He admitted later that he had been too afraid to let me move again. He held me like that until he sensed everything had calmed down. Until, as he put it, she was back. Listening to him say all of this out loud shook me. I tried to laugh it off in front of our friends. I made a weak joke about him being a terrible storyteller, about how maybe he'd mixed a nightmare with reality. But inside, I wasn't laughing. I felt shocked, unsettled, and strangely guilty, as if I had let something ugly slip through me and show itself to someone who loved me. The weirdest part is that as he spoke, a part of me almost felt like I already knew what he was going to say. I didn't consciously remember crouching on the bed or snarling or anything like that, but something about the story rang inside me in a way that made me very uncomfortable. It was like a puzzle piece dropping into place that I didn't want to see completed. After that gathering, he never really brought it up again. He clearly regretted talking about it. I could see it in the way he avoided the subject, in the way he changed the conversation if it came close. I think part of him wished he had never said anything. He hadn't told the story to scare me or embarrass me. It had been pulled out of him, and once it was out, it hung in the air between us. For my own sanity, I have never pinned a perfect label on what that was. I don't like to think that something had me that night. I don't like the idea that anything was on me or in me or fully over me. Maybe that's partly denial. Maybe it's self-protection. I've always been respectful of the unseen. I don't invite things in. The thought that something might slip through anyway is not something I enjoy sitting with for long. So I've spent a lot of time wondering if there might be another explanation. Could it have been a kind of half-dream on his part? Could he have been in a state between sleep and waking, seeing my real body, but with his mind overlaying a disturbing image on top of it? Was it possible that the intense negative energy I had been feeding had created some kind of mental projection, something that only he could see? Sometimes I lean toward the idea of an image being projected rather than a physical transformation, almost like I broadcast something ugly that night, and he, being the one closest to me, picked it up and saw it with his psychic or emotional eyes, not maybe his physical ones. A superimposed vision rather than something truly inhabiting me. I still don't know. What I do know is that I don't have experiences like that anymore. Not long after that time in my life, my mother gave me something I hold on to strongly, a deep faith in Saint Michael. She taught me about him, not just as a figure in stories, but as a protector and warrior against dark and malicious things. She encouraged me to call on him when I felt afraid, weighed down, or under attack. I took that seriously. Now, whenever I feel uneasy, I ask Saint Michael for protection. I picture him standing between me and anything nasty, sword in hand, shield raised. It might sound simple, or even childish to some, but it works for me. I feel safer. I feel calmer. And since building that faith and calling on him, I haven't had anything similar happen. No strange crushing nights, no stories from others about my face changing into something horrible. It feels like a powerful barrier has gone up. In my mind, I like to say, he's got my back, and the wicked things know better now. I don't talk to my ex-partner very much these days. Life has taken us in different directions, but I still think about that night sometimes, and about what he did. He could have panicked. He could have jumped out of bed and run out of the room. He could have pushed me away in fear. Instead, in the moment he thought he was facing something dark wearing the face of the person he loved, he didn't abandon me. He didn't attack me. He grabbed me, pulled me close, and held on until he felt I was myself again. I respect that a lot. Whatever really happened that night, whatever mixture of energy, mind, fear, or something darker it was, one thing is clear to me: he chose to hold on to me instead of letting go. And even though I don't have all the answers, that is the part of the story that brings me comfort. A few years ago, I had a dream that was nothing like usual dreams. It was sharp, clear, and so real that even while I was in it, I knew I was dreaming. It wasn't fuzzy or strange like most dreams are. Everything in it felt solid, familiar, and focused, as if I was awake but walking in another layer of reality. In the dream, I was in the house I live in now. Not some random made-up place, but my actual home, laid out exactly as it is in real life. I remember being in my mother's ensuite bathroom for some reason. The light in the room was soft, neither too bright nor too dim, like daylight passing through a thin curtain. The tiles, the mirror, the bench, everything was as it should be. But I wasn't alone. There in the bathroom with me was an elegant, elderly woman. She didn't look like anyone in my family. She didn't match any of the usual grandma images we often carry in our heads. She wasn't the tiny, hunched, 4-foot-tall type with tightly curled white hair and deep wrinkles. Instead, she looked like she had stepped right out of an old English stately home. She was tall and slender, with a graceful posture. Her hair was a soft dove gray, falling a little longer than you'd expect for someone her age, smooth and neat. She wore a blue dress that suited her perfectly, simple, elegant, and old-fashioned in a refined kind of way. Her skin was pale and gently lined, her eyes kind. Her hands caught my attention too. Long, elegant fingers, delicate and controlled, like the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime doing something precise and beautiful. Her presence felt completely natural, even though I didn't recognize her. I wasn't afraid of her at all. There was no alarm, no feeling that an intruder was in our house. Instead, I felt calm, curious, and somehow comfortable, as if on some level my mind already knew her. She smiled at me with a warm, gentle smile that reached her eyes, and I felt drawn to sit beside her. So I did. In the dream, I walked over and sat down on the floor with her, as if it was the most normal thing in the world to sit on the bathroom floor with a stranger. I took a moment to really look at her, to study the lines of her face, the softness in her expression, the way she held herself. She radiated a quiet kind of elegance, like someone who had lived a long life and carried herself with grace through all of it. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft and clear. She asked me very gently if I would like to hear her play the piano. There was something in her tone that sounded almost hopeful, as if this meant a lot to her. I didn't hesitate. The idea of being played a few songs by this refined, mysterious older lady felt strangely special. I smiled and told her yes, I would be happy to listen. She seemed delighted. "I'm so happy I can play my favorite songs again," she said. There was such joy in her voice when she spoke about it. The piano brings me joy. The dream changed then, but not in a sudden, jarring way. It was more like one smooth movement into another scene. I don't remember every small detail of how it shifted, but I remember hearing her play. Her fingers moved with ease and skill, the way someone plays when they've been at the piano their entire life. The music was beautiful, gentle but full, rich with emotion. Even in the dream, I was amazed at how well she played, how light and confident her touch was on the imaginary keys. I listened, completely absorbed. I can't tell you exactly how long she played for. Time in dreams doesn't behave like normal time. I just remember feeling like I was wrapped in the sound and the warmth of her presence, sitting there with this graceful woman who seemed so happy to share her music with me again. Then, without any fade-out or dramatic ending, the dream was simply over. It didn't blur or get strange toward the end. There was no scene change or sudden shock. One moment I was listening to her play. The next moment I was awake in my bed, the real morning light shining in, the memory of the dream bright and intact in my mind. It didn't feel like a normal dream that fades quickly as soon as you open your eyes. It felt like something that had really happened somewhere, and I'd just come back. Later that morning, I went downstairs. My mother was in the living room, talking to my grandmother. They were seated close, their heads slightly inclined toward each other, voices low and serious. It was clear from their posture and expressions that they were deep in conversation, not just making casual small talk. I noticed my grandmother's eyes first. They looked sad. There was a heaviness about her face, a quiet grief that sat in the lines around her mouth and in the way she moved. I didn't want to interrupt their conversation, so I just nodded a hello and left them to it. But the image of my grandmother's sad eyes stayed with me as I went about the morning. Later on, When my grandmother had gone and my mother came back upstairs, I couldn't stop myself from asking, "What's wrong with Grandma?" I said. My mother sighed softly and sat down, her expression serious. She told me that my grandmother had just received some bad news. A dear friend of hers, someone she had known for many years, had passed away after a long illness. The friend had suffered for a while, and now she was gone. The moment my mother said that, I didn't feel surprised. There was a strange stillness inside me. I realized that somehow I already knew something had happened. I hadn't known the details, of course, but the dream, the feeling of it, the timing, it all clicked together. My mother told me that this friend lived far away, and that I had never met her, never seen her, never even been around when she visited. She said I wouldn't know what she looked like, but I did. Without thinking too hard about it, I told my mother, "I've seen her." She looked at me sharply, clearly doubting that. "You haven't. You wouldn't have. She lived far away. You never met." "I saw her last night," I insisted, "in a dream." I started describing the woman from my dream. I told her about her height and build, that she was tall and thin, not short and frail. I talked about the color and style of her hair, that long, soft, dove-gray hair that looked so elegant. I described her blue dress, the way she carried herself, the gentle voice, the refined hands and long fingers. I told her how calm and elegant she was, like a lady from an old English estate. My mother's face changed as I spoke. Her eyes widened, and I could tell she was comparing every detail I gave with the picture she held in her own mind. Then I mentioned the piano. I told her how the woman had asked me if I wanted to hear her play, how she'd said she was happy she could play her favorite songs again, that the piano brought her joy. How beautifully she had played. My mother stared at me. She hadn't told me anything yet about this woman's personality, interests, or habits. She hadn't even told me her name. When I finished, she slowly nodded, almost to herself, and said that everything I had described matched her mother's friend exactly. The look, the manner, the elegance, even the piano. I didn't feel shocked the way you might expect. I didn't feel like screaming, "Oh my God, it was a ghost," or anything like that. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm, like a puzzle piece had just settled into place. It was as if some part of me already knew this woman, even though we had never met in life. My mother didn't know the song I hummed from the dream, though. I tried to hum the melody that had been played to me that night, but she didn't recognize it. The tune slipped away from me slowly as days passed, like water leaking through cupped hands. After a while, I couldn't remember it well enough to hum it properly anymore, so I let it go. We decided quietly, without a dramatic conclusion, that maybe her friend had come to say goodbye. Perhaps, my mother suggested, her friend had found a way to visit someone who could receive her in that way, even if that someone was her friend's granddaughter who had never met her. Maybe she wanted to play her favorite pieces again, one last time, in a place where she was free of her sickness and limitations. Some weeks later, I visited my grandmother. She mentioned her friend again, talking about her with a mixture of sadness and fondness. I saw the way her eyes softened when she remembered her. The grief was still there, but alongside it was a warm light, like when you remember good times after the pain dulls a little. I asked my grandmother, gently, if her friend had a favorite song she liked to play. By then, I had forgotten the tune from my dream enough that I couldn't recognize it if someone else hummed it, but I still wanted to know. My grandmother's face lit up slightly, as if the question tugged her back into some happy memory. Without a word, she stood up and shuffled off to another room. She came back holding an old tape case, one of those plastic ones that used to hold recorded music. As she approached, she started humming a tune. The sound hit me like a soft shock. It was familiar. It was the song I had been played in my dream. The same gentle rise and fall, the same comforting melody that the elegant lady had brought out of the piano for me. Even though the details had faded in my memory, the moment my grandmother hummed it, something inside me recognized it instantly. Grandma told me as she held the tape that her dear friend had been a wonderful piano player. She said that in her younger years and for most of her life, playing the piano had been one of her greatest joys. She used to sit and play for ages, the music filling the house. But in the last few years of her life, because of her illness, she had not been able to play anymore. Her hands, her body, something about her condition wouldn't allow it. This had been a deep sadness for her, to be separated from something she loved so much. As my grandmother spoke, remembering her friend's talent and the pain of not being able to express it anymore, something small but noticeable happened. On the wall of my grandmother's house, she had a collection of large leaves pinned up. This was thanks to my younger brother, who, when he was small, loved collecting interesting leaves from the park. It was his little habit. He'd find big, pretty ones, different shapes, colors, and sizes, and proudly bring them to Grandma. She, being the kind of grandmother who treasures every little gift, would tack them onto the wall as if they were artwork. Maple leaves, gum tree leaves, jacaranda leaves, they made a simple, natural collage above her furniture. While we were talking about Laurel's love for music and her sadness at not being able to play, one of those leaves suddenly fell. There was no breeze, no open window, no one brushed past the wall. It dropped from where it had been pinned and drifted down to the floor near us. All three of us noticed it. It wasn't loud, but it was obvious enough in the quiet of the moment that it made us pause. My grandmother reached down and picked it up. I looked at it properly for the first time. Of all the leaves on that wall, the one that had fallen was a laurel leaf. I hadn't known her friend's name until then. My grandmother told me in that moment that the elegant piano-playing woman I'd seen in my dream, the one whose tune I recognized, was named Laurel. Laurel, and a laurel leaf falling from the wall, just as we were speaking about her life and her music. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the pin was loose and it chose that exact moment to let go. Or maybe Laurel was there with us, listening as we remembered her, pleased to hear her name spoken with love and her music hummed again. Maybe she had come to play one last time in my dream, in a body that could move freely, with hands that could glide over the keys, then stayed close long enough to listen as we joined the dots between worlds. I don't claim to know for sure, but when I think about that dream, the way I saw her, the way the pieces lined up afterward, the description, the piano, the song, the laurel leaf and Laurel's name, I feel less like I had just a dream, and more like I was given a visit. A quiet, gentle, graceful visit from someone who wanted, just once more, to sit at a piano, play her favorite songs, and be known. It was the summer of 2003, January, and I was still a teenager. Back then, summer holidays were the best part of the year for me. School was over, the days were long and warm, and my family always tried to go away somewhere for a week or two. That year, my parents decided we were heading to Unnatural in Victoria. As soon as I heard the plan, I was excited. I was even more excited when they said I could bring my best friend Joe along. At that age, going on a family holiday was nice, but going on a family holiday with your best friend felt like the biggest upgrade in the world. Everything is more fun when you have someone your own age to share it with, someone you can whisper to at night, laugh with, and complain to if needed. My parents handled all the booking stuff, so I didn't pay much attention to the details. All I really knew was that we were staying in a townhouse for the duration of the holiday. At some point, they mentioned that it had been recently renovated and that the building itself was originally from the 1800s. The owners had told them it now had a new kitchen, new bathrooms, all fresh and updated, which sounded nice. To me, it just meant clean rooms, modern fittings, and maybe some old-fashioned charm. I thought it sounded cool to stay in a place that was old but new at the same time. I had no idea how strange it was going to feel inside that house. By the time we arrived in Warrnambool, the day was already pretty warm. That summer feeling was everywhere. Bright sky, hot air, the smell of sunscreen, and sea not too far away. We drove up to the townhouse and stopped out front. The outside looked fairly normal, older style, but not falling apart or anything. You could tell it had been standing there a long time, but it also looked cared for. We lugged our bags out of the car and went in to explore. The inside layout was simple, but interesting. Downstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was where my parents would sleep, and the other was for my little brother. There was also a bathroom, a laundry, a kitchen, and a lounge room on that level. Everything downstairs looked fresh and new, like the owners had put a lot of effort into the renovations. New tiles, new cupboards, clean paint, everything in its place. A staircase led up to the second floor. Upstairs, there were 2 more bedrooms. One had 2 single beds and no bathroom attached. The other had an ensuite built into it. As soon as Joe and I got upstairs, we looked at each other and didn't even need to argue. We both wanted the room with the ensuite. It was a teenager's dream. Our own bathroom, a bit of privacy, and a whole floor between us and the parents. We could stay up late, talking, laughing, and being loud without worrying too much about waking everyone downstairs. So that was decided quickly. Parents downstairs, my brother downstairs, Joe and I upstairs in the room with the ensuite. Our bags landed on the floor, and we started spreading our stuff out like we owned the place. The first night there seemed completely normal. We were tired from the drive and from the excitement of arriving somewhere new. We explored the house a bit, went out for a while, came back, ate dinner, and eventually went upstairs. I remember feeling happy, relaxed, and a little wired from being somewhere different. Joe and I stayed up talking in our beds, but nothing unusual happened. Eventually, our energy ran out, and we fell asleep. If anything strange was in the house that first night, it kept very quiet. It was on the second night that things started to feel odd. That evening, Joe and I were doing what we always did on holidays, lying in our beds, facing each other across the room, chatting and giggling about everything and nothing. The light from the main room light had been turned off, and the room was dim, lit mostly by the light spilling in from somewhere further down the hall, and maybe the soft glow from outside. Our bags were pushed up against the walls, and everything was in that comfortable kind of teenage mess. Not dirty, but definitely not neat. On one of the bedside tables between our beds, there was a touch lamp. You know the kind I mean, the lamps where you turn them on and off by tapping the base, not with a switch. Those lamps usually need a firm tap to change settings. You can't just brush past them softly and expect them to react. You have to make proper contact with the metal. We hadn't used that lamp at all since arriving. We'd just been using the ceiling light before going to bed, then turning it off and lying in the dark to talk. The lamp just sat there, off. We were in the middle of joking about something silly when the lamp switched on. Just like that. 1 second, it was dark, except for the little bit of light from outside. The next second, the touch lamp beside us glowed to life and lit up the room with a warm light. Both of us froze. We were nowhere near it. Neither of us had reached an arm out. Neither of us had bumped the table. The lamp was just on. For a few seconds, we sat there staring at it, and a cold feeling crept up the back of my neck. I could see by Joe's face that she was thinking exactly what I was thinking. That wasn't normal. She said. Okay, that's creepy, I answered. We both laughed nervously, because laughing is easier than admitting you're unsettled. I leaned over and tried to turn it off. It didn't respond to a light touch. I had to tap it properly, with a bit of force, to make it go through its dimming cycles and finally cut out completely. That reminded me how hard you normally had to hit it to get it to do anything. It made what we'd just seen even stranger. When it went dark again, I straightened up and tried to shrug it off. Ghost, I joked, pulling a face. Yeah, right, Joe said, forcing a laugh. Maybe it just, I don't know, short-circuited or something. We pushed the weird feeling away and went back to our late-night nonsense. Every time we looked at the lamp, though, it felt different now, like we were waiting for it to do something again. After a while, just when we'd started to relax, it did. The lamp turned itself on a second time. No one touched it. We weren't even moving at that moment. We were just talking quietly, half lying down, trying to unwind enough to sleep. Then, click, light filled the room again without warning. This time we didn't laugh first. We both jerked our heads towards it at exactly the same time, eyes wide. You could feel the shift in the room. It went from playful to uneasy in a heartbeat. Okay, no, Joe said. Nope, you turn it off. You turn it off, I shot back. We argued in whispers for a moment, then I made her do it. She leaned over, hit the base with her hand, and it finally went dark again. Neither of us wanted to risk it turning on a third time. Let's just go to sleep, I said after a moment. Yeah, Joe agreed quickly. We both rolled onto our sides and faced away from each other a bit, like two kids pretending not to be scared. The room felt different now, less like a fun holiday sleepover, more like something was sitting quietly and watching us. That night, it took a lot longer for us to fall asleep. On the third night, things got stranger in a different way. That evening had the same basic start. Dinner, family time, then upstairs to our room. We were quieter that night, still thinking about the touch lamp. I remember checking it before turning off the main light, like I was expecting to catch it doing something. It just sat there, still and harmless. Eventually, Joe drifted off to sleep. I was lying there on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling, half in that floating place between awake and asleep. The house was quiet. You could hear those faint sounds you get at night in any building. Little ticks and creaks, the occasional rustle of something outside in the garden. Then I heard something that didn't fit into those normal background sounds. From the direction of the ensuite, I heard the clear, sharp sound of drawers being opened and closed. Not once, not twice, over and over. The ensuite was attached to our room. I knew exactly where the vanity was, where the drawers were located. I could picture the movements as I listened. A drawer sliding open, the wooden runners or metal tracks, making that low scrape, then the thud of it being pushed shut. Again and again. Open, close, open, close. The sound was so clear that my heart started pounding. It was late. Joe was asleep. I could see her breathing slowly in the other bed. I knew neither of us was in that bathroom. I also knew the ensuite had an outside door that led to somewhere else in the house, not just the door from our bedroom. That thought came to me in a rush. Maybe Mum is in there, I told myself. Maybe she's come in through the other door to put something away or get something. It was the only explanation I could come up with that made me feel even slightly better. I lay there stiff, listening to the repeated opening and closing. I was too scared to get up and check. No way was I walking into that bathroom in the dark when the drawers were moving like that. The sound wasn't furious or violent. It wasn't like someone was slamming things in anger. It was steady, like a person calmly going through the drawers, searching for something. After a while, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse because then there was nothing for my brain to cling on to except my imagination. Eventually, somehow, I fell asleep. The next morning, when I woke up, sunlight made everything seem less frightening. The house looked normal again, just a place we were staying in for a few days. At breakfast, I asked my mum casually, "Hey, were you in our bathroom last night?" She looked at me blankly. "No," she said. "Why?" "Did you open and close the drawers?" I pressed. "Like a bunch of times?" She shook her head and frowned. "No, we were all asleep before you and Joe were," she said. "We went to bed ages earlier." That answer sent a cold ripple through me. I didn't say anything else at the time, but the memory of those drawers sliding opened and closed in the dark stuck with me for the rest of the day, like a tiny stone in my shoe that I couldn't shake out. By the time the fourth and final night of our holiday came around, Joe and I were both feeling a little uneasy about the upstairs floor, but we were also young and tried to act tough about it. We joked about the ghost lamp and the drawer ghost during the daytime, but once the sun went down, the laughter felt thinner. That last night, something different happened. My friend Tim called me late. Back then, late-night phone calls felt like a big, exciting thing, even if you were just chatting about nothing in particular. My phone lit up, and I answered quietly so as not to wake anyone else. Joe was already getting tired. To keep from bothering her with my talking, I told her, "I'll just go into the other bedroom to chat. If I fall asleep in there, I'll see you in the morning, okay?" She mumbled something like, "Yeah, that's fine," rolled over, and was basically asleep as soon as I left the room. She's always been like that, able to crash out quickly. I stepped out of our bedroom and into the other upstairs bedroom. This second room had 2 single beds and no ensuite attached. It felt slightly plainer, less special than the ensuite room, which is probably why we hadn't chosen it. I lay down on one of the beds, phone pressed to my ear, and talked to Tim for what felt like ages. The house around me was quiet. Everyone else was asleep. The fire of the day was long gone. The air in that room felt still, a little heavy. I talked and laughed in a low voice, trying not to sound as uneasy as I sometimes felt in that house at night. Eventually, the conversation wound down. We said our goodnights and hung up. I put my phone down beside me and rolled onto my side, facing the room. I was tired. My body was settling down, my thoughts were slowing, and I was right at that edge where you're not fully awake anymore, but you haven't fallen into a dream yet. That was when I heard it. A voice, a soft female voice right near me, not in my head, not in a dream. It sounded like it was in the room, very close by. The tone was gentle and calm, almost affectionate, like someone leaning over a child's bed to tuck them in. It said clearly, "Good night, Catherine, good night." It wasn't mumbled, it wasn't distorted. I heard my name. The sound was quiet, but sharp enough that there was no mistaking it. My eyes snapped open, and I looked around the room. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before. The door was shut the way I'd left it. The curtains were in the same place. The furniture hadn't moved. There was no one standing by the bed, no one moving near the door, no one at all. My heart was beating fast, but I was so tired that a strange kind of laziness pulled at me. My mind tried to take the easy route, to find the simplest explanation. Maybe it was Jo, I thought. Maybe she got up, came into this room, and whispered goodnight as a joke. It didn't quite make sense, though. The voice had sounded like an adult woman, not a teenager. Still, I clung to the idea because it was better than admitting there was no one there. I was too drained to panic properly. I lay there a little longer, eyes open, staring into the semi-darkness. Nothing else happened. No one appeared. No more voices spoke. Finally, my exhaustion won, and I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, as we were driving away from the townhouse, I brought it up. I turned to Jo in the car and asked, "Hey, did you come in to see me last night? Like, did you come into the other bedroom and say goodnight to me?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you kidding?" she said. "I was asleep hours before you were. I didn't go anywhere." I looked at her for a long second, trying to catch some sign that she was lying or teasing me, but there was nothing. She was completely serious. I asked my parents too. "Did either of you come upstairs last night, into the other bedroom? Did you say goodnight to me?" They both said no. My little brother said no. No one had come upstairs. Everyone had gone to sleep and stayed in their rooms. Jo and I started talking then, really talking, about everything that had happened. The touch lamp turning on and off by itself, the drawers in the ensuite opening and closing, the voice saying goodnight in the other bedroom. We were comparing notes, feeling more and more uneasy as we realized just how many odd things we'd experienced in only 4 nights. That's when my dad spoke quietly to my mom and said, "Should we tell them?" I turned around in my seat. "Tell us what?" I asked. A cold little knot formed in my stomach. If my dad was saying it like that, I knew something was coming that would not make me feel any better. Mom and Dad explained that they hadn't wanted to scare us while we were still staying at the house. They decided it was better to wait until we'd left to say anything. But now that we were in the car and the townhouse was behind us, they wanted to be honest. One night they told us they had been in the lounge room downstairs trying to watch a movie. They were using a VHS tape in the video player. Every time they put tape in and tried to play it, the machine would eject the video by itself, over and over. The tape would load, start, then pop right back out as if someone had pressed the eject button. My dad is good with mechanical things. He checked the video player and the tape, expecting to find some obvious problem. A stuck bit, a damaged tape, some flashing error. There was nothing. Everything looked fine. There was no reason for the VHS to keep spitting the tape out like that. It was like something didn't want us to watch the movie, my mum said. On another night, my dad went to bed and left the bedroom light on so he could read his book for a while before sleeping. He had just settled down with his book when the light suddenly switched off by itself. He thought maybe the bulb had blown at first, but before he could get up, he spoke out loud in the empty room, half irritated, half joking. "Oh, for goodness sake, can you please just let me read my book at least?" As soon as he said that, the light switched back on. No one flipped the switch. No one walked in or out. It just came back on, as if something had listened to him and decided to give him what he asked for. He lay there, feeling very aware of the room around him. and read his book under that light that had responded to his words. When we were checking out, my dad mentioned some of these things to the owners in a casual way. He didn't go into every detail, but he said, "We had a few strange things happen here." The owners didn't act surprised. Instead, they admitted that we were not the first people to experience unusual occurrences in those townhouses. Other guests had told them similar things: lights behaving oddly, electronics turning on and off, strange sensations. They also pointed out that all the wiring and electrical work had been fully redone during the renovations. Everything was new and checked. There weren't supposed to be any faults. Hearing that made something click in me. The old building from the 1800s, recently renovated, with fresh walls and new fittings laid over old bones, the touch lamp that turned itself on, the drawers that moved in the night, the gentle voice that said my name and wished me good night, the video that wouldn't play, the light that reacted to my dad's plea. It all started to feel like the same presence, or maybe more than one, trying to let us know we weren't the only ones staying there. By the time the car pulled away from Warrnambool properly and the townhouse disappeared from view, I knew one thing for sure. That trip was not just a normal summer holiday. Something or someone we could not see had shared that house with us. And even though I never saw anything with my own eyes, the touches were there in the small things, in lights and sounds, in drawers and voices. Even now, when I think back to that January in 2003, I can picture that upstairs room, that touch lamp, that ensuite with the drawers, and I can still hear that soft, disembodied voice in my mind saying, as clearly as if it were right beside me, "Good night, Catherine, good night." There was once a young woman whose friends had often called her the girl as bright as the sun, not only because her hair shone the color of ripe wheat at midsummer, and her skin carried a warm glow even in the heart of winter, but because her laughter, when it echoed through the narrow streets of her northern town, could lift the spirits of everyone within earshot. She had grown up in a valley carved by ancient ice, a valley so far north that during the darkest months of the year, the sun barely peaked above the mountains, yet ribbons of green and purple light dallied across the heavens almost every night. In that stark, shimmering place, she learned the meaning of family. For most of her neighbors were relatives, if not by blood, then by bonds of shared hardship. Fishermen who rose before dawn to check nets frozen into the river, shepherds who kept watch on hardy sheep grazing thin, frost-bitten grass, carpenters who built houses out of spruce and pine, harvested on slopes where no car could climb. Between heavy snows and long twilights, the valley folk depended on one another for more than bread or wool or firewood. They depended on each other for stories told beside stoves, for songs that thawed cold mornings, for kindness freely given whenever someone's roof caved beneath snow or someone's heart caved beneath grief. In that cradle of care, the Sun Girl absorbed a lesson deeper than arithmetic or grammar. Love gathered strength when shared. Her parents nurtured the idea so gently she hardly noticed it sprouting within her, the way seeds push roots under frozen soil long before the first green shoot appears. Her mother taught reading by handing down thick novels filled with mountain storms, exile, and redemption. Her father taught music by pressing an old guitar into her hands and saying, "A song is a coat you give another soul when the wind is bad." Grandmothers taught patience through knitting, stitch by stitch, while grandfathers taught resilience by coaxing saplings to grow in stony ground. Their village school taught mathematics and history, but the Sun Girl believed the most valuable lessons occurred in kitchens, where grand feathers of flour floated in sunbeams, or in barns where calves took their first shaky steps on straw. From each place she carried tokens. The smell of warm bread, the first squeaks of a violin during winter recitals, evenings spent wrapped in wool blankets on a hillside, while the aurora rippled overhead like the train of an emerald gown. She also collected friends the way some children collect river stones. There was poetic Kaja, whose diary brimmed with verses about moonlit fir trees, gentle Eli, whose laughter tumbled like loose stones down a slope. Impish Soren, who could carve animal figurines out of ice blocks and leave them glowing in lamplight for passersby to admire. And hardy twins Levi and Lars, who argued about everything, yet linked arms when crossing the frozen river each January. The Sun Girl stored each friendship like a lantern inside her chest. She also cultivated a youthful habit of naming the things she loved as if they were characters in her own saga. The small wooden bridge crossing Icicle Creek she called the Whispering Arch. Her favorite hot cocoa mug she dubbed Hearthkeeper. The lone birch that grew where her valley's main road curved she deemed Sentinel, naming anchored meaning to memory and memory to heart, so she never lost sight of what mattered. One spring, though spring in her valley presented itself as nothing more than a slightly warmer layer of gray on gray, the Sun Girl stood on a ridge overlooking the still frozen river and felt a tug as steady as river current under ice. She knew the world crossed far beyond peaks that ringed her valley like silent guardians, and she felt curiosity stretch new wings inside her. The tug urged her to follow the meltwater south, to see landscapes where twilight did not linger noon and midnight, to test her heart against unknown roads but the Sun Girl considered. She could turn back and abandon the journey or shed objects. Determined, she set down her heavy book of valley legends, her cracked vinyl record of lullabies, the tin of soil, and even her portable kettle for late-night cocoa. Each item she kissed before arranging it neatly by the booth wall. When finished, her pack felt lighter, but her heart thudded heavy. Still, the tollmaster thanked her and waved her through. She walked on, promising herself she would retrieve every belonging someday. Fields replaced granite. New valleys opened, wide and shallow, dotted with villages that smelled of peat smoke. In one village, she helped repair a windmill after unseasonably early storms tore its sails. In another, she taught children to build miniature sleds from twigs and watched them skitter down mud banks. The Sun Girl witnessed meadows carpeted with buttercups, forests humming with bees. She learned local lullabies, trading one of her father's star songs for a flaxen shawl woven with river patterns. Every day, new faces and new customs shaped her thoughts, but inside she carried a private ache. Though she collected friendships like hesitant rays of sun on late spring fields, she missed the profound safety of her childhood network, missed being known completely. She could not deny a yearning to belong wholly again. Months later, the road ran beside a coastal cliff. Gulls shrieked above. A new toll booth appeared, larger than the first, perched at the far end of a narrow bridge spanning a sea channel. Sun-bleached boards spelled the same decree. One bag forward. Extra weight stopped. The tollmaster here looked younger, though their eyes bore the same ageless clarity. Traveler, lighten your load once more. The Sun Girl's chest tightened. She had already pared herself to near necessity, yet she found the rules unyielding. She laid down her sleeping in habit, meaning the luxury of rising only when the sun had climbed. She set aside evenings of perfect solitude with only crickets and her own breath. She surrendered dignity in the sense that no one here spoke her language fluently enough to catch her nuance. To communicate, she flailed with gestures and broken grammar, often sparking chuckles among the locals. She parted with the gift of anonymity, because her sun-bright hair, her unfamiliar vowels, her wonder-struck manner, all marked her as foreign wherever she went. She packed these intangible weights into nothing visible, yet she felt them slide from her shoulders as surely as stones, leaving a raw emptiness. She signed the booth ledger with trembling hand, accepted a stamped token, and crossed the channel under circling gulls. Down the coast, she found work gutting silver fish, whose scales glittered like spilled starlight. Inland, she picked grapes that popped sweet between her teeth. She learned to dance to fiddles that lilted quicker than her hometown waltzes, and to season soups with herbs she could barely pronounce. People greeted her kindly, but none had known her mother's bread or seen her valley lights. When dawn spread rose over vineyards, she sometimes imagined peanut-sized stars still dancing in that northern sky. At night in bunkhouses, she dreamt of mountain outlines and friends laughing on ice. Yet she woke each morning hungry to see what lay beyond the next ridge. Years carved themselves into the soles of her boots. She mended them with patches of varied leather until each foot carried a quilt of journeys. Sometimes she discovered a new delight, like orange blossom honey swirling into black tea, or a harbor town where sea lions barked at full moon. Sometimes she discovered loss, like letters from home that arrived damp, words smeared by snowmelt before they left the Valley Mail Depot. One autumn evening, she reached the edge of a vast desert. Its dunes shimmered gold even in twilight, and the wind carried spice scents from caravans. Right where the last oasis palmettos stood, she found a third toll booth, taller than both before, carved with runes older than any tongue she knew. Its sign bore the same sentence, but in deeper ink. One bag forward, extra weight stopped. The tollmaster this time wore no clear age. Their eyes mirrored summer sky, winter ice, and starless midnight all at once. They waited without impatience. The sun girl set her pack down and said, in a voice cracked from travel but still glowing, "I have nothing left but the people in my heart. They weigh nothing physical, yet they mean more than tapestry or bread or dawn. Please do not ask me to part with them." Her plea tumbled out like water from a bursting dam. She described Kaja's poems written by lantern, Eli's tea that smelled of cinnamon, Soren's ice wolves glinting under aurora, Levi and Lars flipping their lucky coin. She described parents singing a lullaby of returning light, the valley's hush under falling snow. She wept silently at first, then loudly, tears leaving salt streaks on dusty cheeks. The tollmaster listened, without moving until her sobs dwindled to sniffles. Then, voice smooth as wind across dune, they repeated the decree. "Traveler, lighten your load once more. The journey ahead is too long for anything extra. Only the essential remains." The sun girl felt her knees fail. She fell to the desert floor, sand chilling despite daylight heat still trapped below the surface. Memories of those she loved circled her like protective flames. She saw Kaja's shy grin, Eli's freckled grin, her father's hands strumming hope, her mother's eyes brimming comfort. Losing them felt like tearing free the last anchor from her chest. Yet a quiet thought crept in alongside despair. Maybe the tollmaster did not mean annihilation, only safekeeping. She pictured a hidden shelf inside the booth, safe from wind and scorpions, where each beloved could rest until she called. Did she trust such care? Trust required risk. She stood slowly, dusted her skirt, dried her face. With deliberate respect, she cupped invisible shapes, each person, each memory, and placed them one by one onto the booth's wide windowsill. With every placement, she whispered names, virtues, thanks. When finished, she pressed trembling lips to the glass, leaving a faint mark. Then she stepped back, shoulders light beyond belief or understanding. The tollmaster nodded, eyes now soft as dusk. A door in the dunes parted and revealed a narrow path gleaming silver under the first star. She walked. Nights in the desert were colder than the valley's worst storms, but she kept moving. Days scorched. Mirages tempted with phantom valley hills, yet her heart, though emptied, burned steady. Time lost meaning. She measured progress by subtle shifts. Dunes changed from ochre to streaked white, constellations pivoted overhead, unknown constellations joined them. At last she emerged into a place unlike any map. A plateau of shaded terraces and waterfalls tumbling from heights that touched sunrise. There at the edge of mist, the tollmaster waited, again, though this one looked identical to all before and yet entirely new, as if many forms shared one soul. Their cloaks shimmered with embroidery of countless journeys. Beside them stood shelves upon shelves. There lay her books and records, kettle and soil tin, guitar strings and quilted boots. There lay sleeping in mornings bottled like fog, solitude packaged like feather pillows, dignity folded like pressed linen. There stood the northern lights, contained yet bright in their jar of living glass. There rose miniature mountains carved in crystal. And in front, on a velvet cushion, stood her loved ones. Not physically, but as radiant silhouettes humming joy, their essence captured unmarred. They shone with colors unseen before, the walled-up sunlight of her own devotion finally free. The tollmaster said nothing. The sun girl fell to her knees, overcome by gratitude. She saw clearly that none of her notes of love had disappeared. They had been guarded while she crossed deserts of self-becoming. She realized further that her new self had room enough to carry every gift without exhaustion. By releasing them temporarily, she had grown strong enough to hold them forever. She stood and embraced Kaja's laugh, shaped like a soft breeze, Eli's warmth shaped like sunrise tea, Soren's humor shaped like ice wolves, still glinting. She laced fingers with the parental blessing that hummed like guitar strings. The items rejoined her, not as heavy burdens, but as weightless prisms through which her inner light refracted more beautifully. When she turned, she caught her reflection in the clear pool formed beneath a waterfall. She hardly recognized the traveler, eyes keen and steady, shoulders set, posture both humble and unbreakable. She understood she had become who she could yet become, and that this becoming was not an end but another threshold. Still, the plateau felt like home because home was now inside her. She bowed to the tollmaster and whispered, "Thank you," knowing those words carried the weight of continents. The tollmaster smiled, then beckoned her to look behind. Down the valley path streamed thousands of travelers, each bearing burdens, each limping toward toll booths. She would greet them, share water, share her story. She would assure them their sacrifices were held safe. She would become guide and guardian, a living testament that love entrusted to mercy returns multiplied. Under setting sun, her valley's lights shimmered unexpectedly on distant clouds, a sign perhaps that home rejoiced in her transformation. She lifted her arms, radiant, ready to serve. And in that place of arriving and departing, she lived not happily ever after in static rest, but joyfully ever onward in wise, unending motion, her soul forever bright as the sun. Lucille stood at the open doorway of the small brick house they had rented for 6 years, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the edge of her skirt, trying to remember how she used to greet her husband before suspicion began to rule her thoughts. The day was warm for early spring, yet a faint wind carried the sharp smell of the paper mill east of town, the same scent she associated with long afternoons waiting for David to come home. She had told herself all morning to stay calm when she saw him, to let the worries go, but the minute his truck pulled up to the curb, the silence inside her felt heavier than a winter storm. She wanted to run into his arms, to feel the steady thud of his heart beneath his thick jacket, and let that rhythm wash away every doubt. Yet her legs rooted to the floorboards, as if they had grown there. When David stepped through the doorway, tall and tired and eager, she tried to summon a smile, but the ghost of the newspaper story flickered in her mind. The murdered truck stop waitress, the police scanner reports, and the whispers from neighbors about drivers who lived 2 lives. She swallowed hard, raised her chin, and forced her lips into a shape that was neither smile nor frown. David took 4 long steps and wrapped his arms around her waist, bending his head to breathe in the faint perfume she used whenever he was due home. It had once reminded him of sweet peaches at the height of summer, the kind his grandmother used to slice over pound cake. But Lucille's body was stiff, rigid as a garden post left all winter in frozen ground. He felt her shoulders lock, her arms stay limp at her sides, and his heart sank. The homecoming he had pictured during 900 miles of highway was not going to happen. Still, he squeezed gently and whispered, "I missed you, Lou." She pulled back, her eyes dark with hurt, and without a word she vanished toward the kitchen. Her voice echoed down the hall a second later, sharper than broken glass. "You did not call, David. You did not call even once." Their daughter Marietta, hearing her mother's raised voice, dropped her doll on the rug and sprinted from the kitchen. She was 7, all elbows and knees, with a head full of golden curls that refused every attempt at taming. Her laughter bounced around the narrow hallway like sunlight off water. She flew into David's arms with such force that he nearly stumbled, but he caught her up easily, planting a quick kiss on her forehead. He drank in the familiar scent of soap and bubblegum, marveling at how much she had grown in the 3 weeks he'd been hauling seed potatoes from Idaho to Georgia. Behind him, Lucille's voice cracked again, raw and splintered. "Let her go, David. Put Marietta down. Stop hugging on her like that." David turned halfway, still holding the child. He knew Lucille's tone too well, a brittle mix of jealousy and fear, the sound of a heart that had stewed too long in loneliness. He set Marietta on her feet, but not before twirling her once, eliciting a squeal of delight. "That's my floppy bunny," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "Stay right here, sugar. I'll see you in 2 shakes." Marietta giggled and bounced onto the overstuffed couch, straight into the pile of laundry Lucille hadn't folded. David watched her for a beat, letting the pure joy in her eyes warm his chest, and then he followed the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. The kitchen smelled of simmering beans, cornbread, and the mystery of Lucille's silence. He found her at the counter, a wooden spoon clenched tight, stirring broth that did not need stirring. Her posture was like a statue. Shoulders drawn up, chin tilted down, jaw clenched. He knew better than to surprise her, so he cleared his throat and stepped closer. "Lou, I know you read that story," he began. "I know you're worried, but I'm not like those men in the paper." Lucille kept her eyes on the pot. "You didn't call," she said again, softer this time but no less accusing. "Not one word." David sighed. "I got tied up at the Amarillo yard, then had to push through a detour after Memphis. There was a pile-up, lanes closed, state troopers waving us off. By the time I thought to stop, I was behind schedule. Dispatch has been cutting guys who miss deadlines. I was worried about keeping my job. You know how it is." She slammed the spoon down, splashing broth across the stovetop. "Don't talk to me about worry. I was up nights imagining a badge showing up at the door. Marietta kept asking why Daddy ain't calling. What could I say? He's too busy working? He's hugging some truck stop tramp? You tell me." Her voice rose, cracking on the last word. David took a slow breath, fighting the urge to defend every mile he had driven. "Those articles, it's always the same handful of fools making the rest of us look bad. Lou, I keep a picture of you two clipped to the visor. I think of you every hour." He reached for her again. She jerked away. "Words, David. Just words." He took her shoulders gently and tried to turn her. She trembled. "I love you, Lucille. I love our girl. That's never changed." "How many others were you hugging while you were gone?" she spat. "How many little floppy bunnies in truck stops and cheap motels?" He bit back frustration. "I'm exhausted, Lou. I haul day and night to keep us afloat. The Depression's closing businesses, cutting lines. Only the best-timed loads get paid. One slip and we're scrambling. I miss one call, and suddenly you think I'm sleeping around? Killing waitresses?" Her eyes flashed. "Don't twist my words. You could have spared 60 seconds. You chose not to." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The familiar ache settled behind his eyes, a dull weight of defeat. "I can't keep doing this dance every time I walk through the door," he muttered. "Marietta hears us. She thinks it's her fault we yell." Lucille's face softened just a fraction, but anger quickly reassembled. "Maybe she wouldn't hear if you didn't disappear." David raised both hands in surrender. "Fine. I'm stepping out. Need smokes? You need anything?" She looked away. He left the kitchen, grabbed his cap, and slipped outside into thick evening air. The diner 10 minutes up the road buzzed under flickering red neon. David stomped rainwater off his boots and nudged the glass door open. The waitress, a woman with a ponytail the color of copper pennies, hurried over with a practiced smile and a coffee pot. He lifted a hand, declining. "Just using the cigarette machine," he said, voice low. She nodded, her smile already redirecting to another customer. David slid coins into the clattering box, felt the pack drop. He pocketed it, glanced around, and realized every booth held men who looked a little like him. Tired faces, calloused palms, shoulders sagging under invisible loads. He suddenly wanted a drink to burn away the knot in his chest. Next door at Jarvis's bar, the amber whiskey would glow like hearthlight, soothing at least for an hour. But the memory of flashing police lights crossing the diner window made him hesitate. He pictured dispatch noting a DUI on his record, the company invoices unpaid, Lucille's scowl deepening. He cursed under his breath, stepped back into the rain, and turned home with only the cigarettes. By the time he reached the house, damp jeans clinging to his legs, he had convinced himself a single shot of whiskey from the half-hidden bottle in the truck cab wouldn't count. That rationalization faltered when he fumbled the key, tripped over the threshold, and nearly knocked over the coat stand. The whiskey had turned into several shots, courage into reckless bravado. He tossed his jacket over a chair, boots off with a thunk, and lumbered to the bedroom where Lucille feigned sleep. He stripped striped work shirt and grease-flecked pants, flinging them in a heap. Lucille lay curled away, pillow barricaded against his side. David's heart hammered with need for comfort, for forgiveness, for the warmth that once flowed freely between them. He eased under the covers, moved closer until he felt the heat of her back through the thin nightgown. He whispered her name, fingers brushing her arm. She stiffened, muttering, "Your breath smells like turpentine." He pressed again, voice thick, "Lou, I need to feel you." The rejection he feared flickered in her eyes as she rolled over. She looked small in the dim lamplight, face pale, lips drawn tight. "What do you want, David?" She sounded so tired he almost withdrew, almost. But the whiskey insisted on hope. He leaned in, tried to kiss her cheek. She pressed her hand to his chest. "Don't," she warned softly. "Not like this." He ignored warning, thinking a kiss would rekindle what was lost. He grabbed her wrist, nudged closer. She tensed, a shudder of panic rippling through her limbs. "David, stop." Her voice cracked. He pressed forward, blinded by longing. She shoved at him, tears sliding across her cheeks, raw fear in her eyes. His foggy mind registered alarm too late. In a flash of regret he froze, realized what he was doing, and recoiled as though struck. He rolled off the bed, hit the floor, scrabbled for clothing. Shame roared inside his skull. He pulled boots on bare feet, snatched shirt and pants, and fled the room. Lucille's sobs trailed behind him, each one slicing deeper than a whip. He stood half-dressed in the hallway, heart pounding, listening to her weep. The ring on his finger felt like molten metal. He clawed at it, skin tearing until it slipped off, leaving a smear of blood.